but I don't know where those went. For the 10th Alka Jam, I decided to step outside my comfort zone and learn Godot during the jam. There's a time lapse if you want to see me reading through documentation while making a game, which I think is quite interesting. It didn't do nearly as well as my Pygame entries, but it was my first serious step outside of Pygame, which is important. It taught me that I don't really have an interest in making 2D games with anything other than Pygame, but I also saw Godot as a serious option for any 3D or VR projects I wanted to work on. To finish off the year, I headed back to the Ludum Dare, which I hadn't done in ages. I developed Shifting Edge for the 47th Ludum Dare, which is just rolling blades, but with angry bushes, the world's most violent gardener, and the bad parts of the controls made worse. As you could guess, it didn't do too well even though it looked nice. Just before the end of the year, I also hit 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. That's 1,000 to 10,000 in a year. The power of both. 2020 was the year I started my computer science degree and gained the shackles of college. You can really tell from the amount of games I've put out recently. I'm recording this video just shortly after finishing my degree though, which I'll make a video about soon. Moving on to 2021, aside from making that one video that made a bunch of people angry, it was probably the most uneventful year for me. I made this weird archery game with a restricted color palette that I never finished, but was revived in a collaboration you'll be seeing very soon. For the 11th Alka Jam, I made Wandering Soul, a weird platformer that mixes in more traditional bullet hell mechanics. This is actually my most downloaded game at the moment, but the innovative thing here was that I made Wandering Soul while live streaming the whole thing. I ended up hitting almost 200 concurrent viewers, which was awesome. Jumping to the next Alka Jam, I made Cave In for the 12th Alka Jam. If you've been counting, I participated in every Alka Jam up to this point, but sadly this streak would be broken very soon. Cave In is a simple arcade game based on a Minecraft minigame when I was,
on 2D.
Yeah. It's definitely the runt of my Game Jam entries in the last 5 years. No worries though, this was the first year I was working on that one game that people keep asking me about, Vagrant. It's Aeroblaster, except it's an RPG, and it ended up looking quite good in my opinion. I finally fully stepped into an object-oriented approach for the game's codebase after 8 years of experience. This is also the first project where I have truly split up my code into more than just a couple files. As one more fun fact, it's on the banner of r/Pygame. To top off the year, I created my grass framework that gives me the graphical edge in pretty much every game jam nowadays. It can handle 10,000 blades of physically interactive grass on the screen at once, and billions if you count the off-screen blades. With that runt of a year out of the way, I can get on to 2022, my 9th year of game dev. To kick off the year with a bang, I made Gleamshroom, based on that unfinished game all those years ago, for the 14th Alka Jam. Gleamshroom was the first time I seriously used the multiplication blend flag in Pygame, and it resulted in some really nice looking lighting. This was honestly where I hit my modern plateau in my artistic ability. I haven't improved much since, but I have some plans for 2024 that might finally be a significant upgrade. Also, some VTuber played a lightly modified version of Gleamshroom that someone modified as a fan game or something, which was the first time a big YouTuber played one of my games. To follow Gleamshroom up, I just took the assets and threw together a functional MMO type game and actually did my first international playtest of a multiplayer game. It taught me a lot of things about both networking framework architecture, since I was writing my own, and high latency game dev networking in general. In April, I made Exploit for the 50th Ludum Dare. I felt like my last Ludum Dare entry went unnecessarily poorly, so I wanted to give it another shot. It's a game where you play a frog dinosaur thing that will get angry and explode unless he gets enough lollipops to eat. If you haven't noticed, that's where my current profile picture comes from. Exploit ended up placing 7th in graphics. Placing top 10 in any category was always a big and seemingly achievable goal for me. Shortly after, I got into shaders with OpenGL and started mixing OpenGL with Pygame for post-processing to create the rendering pipeline that I use for my games nowadays. Initially, I did this with PyOpenGL, but I found out about ModernGL and I've been using it ever since. This was also the year that the popularity of Vagrant peaked, which happened after I added shaders. While on summer break, I worked on this isometric game meant to be a successor in terms of mechanics in that world to Drawn Down Abyss. I ended up dropping it before making any devlogs or anything though. The game jams in 2022 didn't really line up with my availability, so I made Hue Flowing, a game with a game jam type scope and my new shader pipeline to top off the year. You're a ninja that jumps around and paints the world into existence with the magic of shaders. It was an actually solid game in my opinion, unlike most of my projects. I just feel that everything fit together very nicely. It ended up being featured on Buried Treasure, which was super nice to see. And we finally made it to my 10th year of game development, 2023. To start off the year, I created Pigpen, a Pygame framework I've been using all year in some capacity to make games. It has built-in support for fancy things like foliage, grass, water, physics, particles, and even things like raycasted lighting running on shaders. As an initial test for the water and lighting, I started working on an unnamed fishing roguelite, which never really showed up on my channel. Before I knew it, the next Ludum Dare had rolled around. It was Ludum Dare 53, and I put Pigpen to the test for the very first time in a game jam by making Moonrabbit Collection, a simple game where you find lost items for bunnies on some strange moon. The aesthetic was inspired by a game called Lucid by RxI that inspired me a lot a long time ago. This was also my very first time using FL Studio in a game jam, and it made a huge difference. I placed first in graphics, including beating all the team entries out of thousands of games. I credit that to the whole game aspect interplay thing I mentioned earlier because the music turned out quite well as well and resulted in a bronze medal in the mood category. After participating in almost 30 game jams, winning a category in the Ludum Dare was an awesome achievement that I didn't think I'd ever reach. I think it's given me the confidence to really sink in some time on my first paid project in over 5 years for 2024 and finally start to move on from game jams. I'll probably keep doing them every now and then, but not as often as I used to. In my summer break, after my 8-week summer semester in university, I really focused on learning 3D game development using Godot 4 so I could make VR games, which resulted in this archery game planned to be based on Alchemic Archer that I plan on picking up again when I have more time. For reference, in case you're watching this video in the future, I also hit 50,000 subscribers here on YouTube this year, which is a huge milestone for me. If you've been keeping up with my videos, you've probably seen Pigscarts, which is my 2D Mario Kart knockoff that's actually supporting online multiplayer. I've gone through a few playtests already and it's been a ton of fun. I'm hoping to release Pigscarts next year. It runs on my new networking framework that I plan on keeping private for now. It's quite convenient to work with and I made a video about it, but I'm planning to rebuild it next year from the ground up with the experience I have now to create a user-friendly networking framework for Pygame. The final project from this year that you guys would know about is the Platformer Tutorial project. It's a simple game, but it's made for a tutorial to replace the 5-year-old tutorial that got my channel to where it is. If you're interested in learning Pygame and you already know Python, it's worth checking out. There are 2 more projects from this year that I haven't really shown much yet. First, we have my new avatar that I plan on using for regular streams next year. I built it using Pygame, ModernGL, and MediaPipe using lots of magical math. I'll probably have a dedicated video on it soon since it's super interesting. As my final project for 2023, I have a project that I haven't really shown because it's a project I was hired to work on that I don't own. However, the owner of the project has generously agreed to sponsor this video, so here it is. This is of Murder on Moonshine, your mobster in Prohibition era New Orleans, carrying out assassinations for control over moonshine production in the swamps. It's an intense shooter platformer running on my Pigpen framework, and it's available for wishlist on Steam with a scheduled release date of early 2024. There's a link in the description so you can go check it out. I've been contributing to the project on and off on the side all year, and I think the gameplay is turning out to be quite fun. With that, I've summarized over 50 of my major projects in my first 10 years of game development, mostly with Pygame. It's been quite the journey that can primarily be described through one thing for those of you wondering how I learned: game jams. Since I just graduated with my computer science degree this year and I'm finishing off of Murder on Moonshine, I'm about to hit a massive change of pace in my life and I'm looking forward to some awesome game dev projects I have planned. Thanks for watching until the end, and I hope you'll stick around to see my future progress in the years to come.
Welcome everyone, this is another Chris Chorus with your host Chris, and today we're going to be coding.
I made a Souls-like game in a month. Well, just the combat part. Link at low FPS is just flat out not working correctly. So I tried fixing it, spent an entire day on it, and the solution? Don't play below 30 FPS. I couldn't even get a consistent solution. Then we got roll teleporting, but only when starting the roll mid-air. And then that. Slopes are still slippery. Eventually, I sort out most of those things and add sprinting. Then I make some UI for health and stamina, so I could work on implementing those features. So things like rolling and sprinting would consume stamina. Now I started animating some basic attacks to add damage functionality. These animations would also use root motion. And of course they didn't work correctly. The roll was still working, but the attacks were going nuts. After a bit I thought I had it fixed. But then I found another bug. The first attack would work perfectly, but if you timed the second attack just right, you start sliding. This was an issue with disabling and enabling root motion. Then I also noticed a bug with rolling. If you spam it, you can move around whilst in a roll animation. I also found a weird interaction when you immediately roll after attacking. You just kind of face plant. After a while, I got everything to mostly work, so I made a roll sound. But this time, I still wasn't completely sure on the art style, so I made it sound metallic, which I later changed. Back to present, I'm making more animations, like falling down. You can do a get up roll to stand up faster. With damage working, it was finally time to add healing. So I drew some potion sprites in 4 different states. Full, half, 1 sip away from empty, and of course empty. Then I made yet another animation for drinking, set everything up, and healing was working just fine. Now I wanted to make taking damage to be more responsive. So I added procedural damage flinch. It's especially apparent on attacks that don't stagger. After that, I animated some heavy attacks. You can, of course, charge them for extra damage. Now that the core features of the game were done, I made a main menu. I decided to do this now, since making it at the end of the jam could pose unexpected issues. And I made it fully controller compatible. I probably didn't have to do this, but I did. Anyway, it's already been 10 days and I still don't have a boss or even a level. So I start working on a level first. I get some basic shapes in for the arena's proportions and then add a skybox to set the mood of the level. I use the skybox shader from my previous project. It allows me to tweak pretty much everything. I end up with this green spooky look. Then I add some boxes to represent buildings, make some hills, and then realize my idea for the level is over scope. So I start from scratch in Blender, this time making a much more closed space, but still keeping it outdoors. I make a bunch of different models and put them in the game to check how they fit. And now it was all coming together. I did this a few more times and then changed the skybox color to a blue one, since I'm no longer following my initial idea. It's 15 days till the end of the jam and I still have no boss, so it's time to make one. I want to make a giant skeleton as the first boss, and the first attempt is not looking too good. I try again and look at the difference. What was I thinking with this one? I rigged the new boss and make a sword for him and the player, and all that's left is animating this undead knight. At first, I wanted the skeleton to permanently be dragging the sword behind him, but I had issues thinking of how I would animate him walking backwards or sideways. So I ended up making him hold the sword on his shoulder, but he still has an attack where he drags the sword. Then I just make a few more combo attacks and put the boss in the game. Firstly, I just get him to walk around. The skeleton's movement is a bit jittery, so I finally add some smoothing between the movement animations. And finally, I make the boss attack you. Everything surprisingly works pretty well. but it's still missing a lot of things. So I made a list of stuff I need to add, starting with sounds. I start with weapon swooshes. Then I make a few hit sounds. The way I make them is using a bunch of samples. Also, I get some environment impact sounds. I then add some extra sounds for the skeleton's sword drag. At this point, I've been playtesting the boss a lot and noticed that the player's dodge is really slow. So I went back to Blender and increased its speed by a decent amount. With the new dodging, the boss fight is feeling great. Lastly, for sounds, I make some new footsteps, both for the player and the boss. For the time being, that's all the sounds I make. And now, it's finally time to make a boss bar, and I do just that. The overall UI of the game is...
I did hit some sick shots.
Have clean code. Now, what I will say, you shouldn't focus 100% on making sure your code's perfect, but it's something that can help you in times when you're fixing bugs or just, you know, when adding features in general. So I have here my game loaded up here, and you can see here the walls, well, nothing looks out of place, obviously. And I actually had this bug that I'm about to show you for quite a while, and I didn't really look into it. But now that I've looked into it, I've discovered, wow, okay, why is this bug happening, what's causing it, and how can I fix it? So, let me show you what the bug is, because you don't see it. So, in this area, we have stone, but over here you can see we have these kind of crystal walls, if you will. And oh, what's over here? Oh, this is sandstone, but you don't see it here. But here you do see it, where, I mean, it's very faint. Let me zoom in maybe. There's like a little crack there, right? And walls don't normally have cracks when they haven't been touched by a pickaxe, I suppose. So I'm going to go into the scene view here, and we're going to zoom in on this area, and I'm going to click on the block here, and you'll see here I've made, so this is the sprite renderer, here's the box collider, here's the object. So I made this little thing, it's really nifty for testing, and you know, it works out really well. So I can basically change the crack of each individual block, or at least not the actual crack, but just the sprite that's rendered on top to visualize the crack. So here, all I have to do is change this slider, and you can see it changes the crack amount. And this would be for like if you're going to be taking a pickaxe or something. And you can see here that when it's at -1, it's actually, there's no crack at all. But when it's 0, it's going, you're going to see the first frame, and then the second, third, fourth, so on and so forth. So basically this slider is just for controlling, you know, which frame to show or not any frame at all. So by default, it shows a -1, like the actual object itself. If we look at my prefabs here, this is the prefab for the object, you'll see it defaults to 31, and even in the code, it's like that. So what's interesting, I'm going to rerun the game here. It's probably going to take a second. Bear with me. I don't know why I honestly... Okay, there we go. I don't know why I unpaused the game. I want to make this quick. So, go... Okay, here we go. Perfect. So, here's another block. And it's kind of weird, because some of them have the crack, but this one doesn't. And if we look, you'll see that... go back to the block. It has a 0. So 0 means the first frame. It's like the first index in an array is 0, so it's the first sprite frame. But -1 just means don't show anything, basically. That's just the way I did it. So by default, it's supposed to show -1, meaning don't show anything. And once you damage the block, it becomes 0. Alright, and I'm going to show you how that actually happens. Like if I, well, let me do this. So let me turn on, because I had this turned off actually. But if you can see here, if I mouse over the block, I can click on it and it cracks it. So this is just for testing. But you can see here, I can actually manipulate these. And if I click on this block here, you'll see that we have, here it's frame 6 in particular. So I'm damaging the block, there's some damage information somewhere, and that there's a system that basically tells these blocks, hey, you need to update your crack sprite so that you're displaying the health properly. Okay, so let's look at my actual code, and this is really where I'm going to get into, why it's important to practice good, clean code, and honestly, this is more of just a specific example of why you should do this certain thing and not other things or whatever. So you can see here, this is the code for that kind of is behind this block object script on each individual block. And here's the actual variable. Now you'll see here it is private. Now I didn't include the word private, but the default access modifier in C# is private, so if you leave it empty, it's private. Although there is a minute difference. This is leaving it blank is not the same as there's a slight difference. I'll tell you that much, but I forget what it is. Also, you can actually, obviously, you can access it through the inspector here because I have it serialized. But beyond that, there is no way to access this variable outside of this code because of the fact that it is private. So one thing you can do because of that, because okay, so this block, well, not this one in particular, but like this one, I didn't mind this one, but it's displaying a crack. So that's not right, okay? It shouldn't be displaying that. It should be -1, because that's what it started off with. But it's 0. Why is it 0? And so the reason why it's 0, if we look back at the code, or one way we can kind of realize, what's causing it to be 0 is, well, first of all, what's causing it to change, okay? So the only thing that can cause this variable to change is stuff within the class. So it's going to be a lot easier to track the issue. So if I right-click on this variable, you might not have known this, but if you double-click to kind of select the variable, right-click on it. In fact, you could probably, you could just right-click on it, I think. And then click Find All References. And this is just my setup here, but yours might look different. But hopefully it'll have some pop-up, and it'll show you all of the different places where that variable is actually used. So I can see there's only 2 places in my code. So the one place is right here where it's in this onValidate, which should only occur when in editor mode, so when you're playing the game. Okay, so when you're in the editor but you're playing, it'll work. Because you saw it working. This basically is used whenever this slider, whenever you change this slider, what's actually happening is that onValidate is being called. And so this code executes every single time you change that slider, and it's something that only happens in edit mode. But so there's probably some other place. I mean, it could happen in runtime. It could happen like when you build your program as well. I'm not sure. Probably not. But regardless, I want to fix this issue at least in the editor because it doesn't look like it should be happening. So we have the crack frame here. This is us just setting the actual integer. Well, it's a float here, but it's basically an integer, and that's used in the shader to tell it which frame of the sprite to use, because it's one whole texture. So you need to get the correct sub image, if you will. So the other place where it's used is in this one function that is public. Okay, it is public. So that means you can't call this function from other places. But one of the places where it's actually called internally is another function I have here called setCrack based on damage. So I can set the crack index arbitrarily, just whatever I want. And that is, of course, used here. But I can also set the crack based on damage. So this function, now I believe this one I'm actually not using anywhere. I am using it inside. Oh, I'm actually using it in the level. Oh, and that's why too. So really I'm only using this function probably for the purpose of setting it to -1, which makes it equal. But anyway, so if we have, okay, I'm getting lost. So this is the function that's being called, and basically whenever you damage a block, this function is going to be called to update the sprites, to effectively just update the actual crack frame sprite that should be used to render on the block. And so here, this is actually where the issue is being caused. I actually discovered what was going wrong, and I double-checked before I made this video. And yes, and so it was a very, very, very simple fix. And I'm not going to say that was because I used good coding practices, but I could say that it at least helped to some degree. Because if this variable was public, then I could be accessing, if I did that, I could be accessing this variable, or someone else could be accessing this variable from a different location, completely separate from the block object. And if there's an issue related to it, it becomes extremely difficult to track down. And so what's important is making sure that, there are some cases where this does, where you can kind of mend this, you can kind of twist this rule of thumb. But most of the time, 99% of the time, you want to make sure all of your variables are private, okay? I honestly should put private there, because having that and just having nothing are slightly different, but they're both the same in that you can't access it publicly from other places in your code. But for the most part, we're fine here. So the crack frame point is you can't access it from anywhere except in here. So if there's a bug and it's related to this variable, you know the bug is in this file, and it makes it easier to figure out what's going wrong. And if you know, like here I can show you that I can change this slider and I can demonstrate that it's working as intended. So this isn't the issue. The issue isn't that, the slider isn't displaying the correct sprite. It's just that whatever is manipulating this slider, whatever is manipulating, in effect, the crack frame, it's doing it wrong. So this function is the root cause. And the reason why is because when the game first starts up, the amount of damage that a block starts off with is 0. So instead of health, it's damage, which I feel like I shouldn't have did it that way. Or actually, I forget which way I did it. I don't know if I did it like ascending or descending, where it's like you start off with this much health, and then over time. No. I did it like that, where you start off instead of health, it's damage. So basically, you start off with total damage of 0, and then as you hit the block more, the damage increases until it exceeds a certain number, and then it's, the block has been broken. Okay. So, and then every time we change that damage amount, we call this function to update the sprite. Now, one of the interesting things, which you may or may not know, is that sometimes floating points have a really hard time at checking to see if something.
China is the future. At least, that's what people say. China is the superpower of the 21st century. It's the largest growing economy in the world, a major player in global politics, and a key driving force in much of modern media creation. But what about video games? China comes up in a lot of conversations these days, but that rarely extends to the world of gaming, and that's because for years, video games have been almost exclusively about Japan, America, and a little bit of Europe. For the last 40 years, these were the only major players in the gaming landscape, but for the first time, that might be about to change. In 2020, MiHoYo's open-world RPG Genshin Impact became one of the largest games in the world, with 23 million downloads in its first week, and for many people, this game came out of nowhere. It went on to become the fastest game on the Google Play and App Store to reach $1 billion in revenue, beating previous record holder Pokemon Go. By comparison, Pokemon Go was the first mobile entry into what is literally the highest grossing media franchise